have a pretty tight agenda today. Welcome to the second Rules Advisory Committee meeting for the HCMO program. My name is Cassie Call, and I'm a policy analyst with the program. Later on in the meeting, we will have Sarah Bottleman, our program manager, presenting as well. Next slide, please. A few meeting logistics. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online if you'd like to review it later. Closed captioning is available for this meeting. Please remain muted if you are not speaking. Similar to the last meeting, we will be unmuting and muting as you are able to speak. Next slide, please. So again, like I said, tight agenda today. For attendance, if you're a RAC committee member, please enter your name in the chat. If you have any technical assistance question, please send a direct message in the chat for Lauren Neely. Our public comment is actually going to be at the front side of the meeting, starting at 10:05 a.m. We will also go through an overview of HCMO and the RAC process. We're going to continue to discussing proposed rule changes. So we will start with reviewing draft rules we didn't go into for the first RAC meeting, discussing any additional changes made to this RAC meeting number 1 based on comment. We will go over our proposed fee schedule and then review our racial equity impact statement and fiscal impact statement, and then do a wrap up and next steps. Next slide, please. So our roles for today's meeting, OSA staff. So we have a few staff on the call. So we're going to present information about HCMO, RAC, and the proposed rule changes. So our role today is to help to facilitate the meeting. RAC members, your role is to provide input on the draft rules and suggest additional changes to the rules. And for the public who is attending, you can provide additional input during the public comment period. Please note that RAC members and the public can also submit comments via email or the public comment form at any time during this process. And we also have a phone number that you can call and leave a voicemail with as well. Next slide, please. All right, so we're moving into our public comment section of the meeting. Next slide, please. So public comment for rulemaking will actually be open until the rulemaking process ends. So this could be tentatively February or March 2026. After the rules hearing, that's when the public comment period will close. So this meeting does include time for public comment. We ask that you do not include private or sensitive information in your comment. You can send comment to the email address that's listed, hcmo.info@osha.org, oregon.gov, sorry. And then we also have other ways to provide comment via form or through a voicemail. Next slide, please. All right, so similar to our last meeting, if you would like to provide public comment and you're a member of the public, please raise your hand. If you are a RAC member, we ask that you hold your comments until the RAC portion starts. I'll give a few seconds to see if anybody would like to provide public comment. I'm currently seeing no hands raised. Let me look at the chat. I don't see anything in the chat. I'll give another few seconds for if people would like to provide public comment. Please raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to check in with OHA members and make sure that I'm not missing anybody who would like to provide public comment.
I'm not seeing anything, Cassie.
Okay. Again, you can always leave public comment through our form, email, or voicemail, and that information is all in the chat and posted online as well. All right, next slide, please. So we're going to quickly review the HCMO and RAC process. Next slide. All right. Since HCMO launched in March 2022, we've had 48 preliminary reviews. As you can see, we've had 41 preliminary reviews completed. So we have 3 still in progress, 3 withdrew, and 1 emergency exemption granted. For comprehensive reviews, we've had 6 total comprehensive reviews. At this time, 0 comprehensive reviews have been completed. We've had 7 withdrawn and again, the 2 emergency exemption requests. So with the comprehensive review, we've had 4 that have withdrawn and 2 are currently still in progress. This is again since November 7th, 2025. If you go to the next slide, please, we have a more detailed graph reviewing each preliminary reviews, the preliminary reviews completed, what has been approved, and what is currently still in progress. Next slide, please. Since HCMO launched in March 2022, we've had 8 year 1 follow-up completed and 4 year 1 follow-ups are currently in progress. We've had 2 year 2 follow-up completed and 6 year 2 follow-up in progress. I do want to note that not all transactions that HCMO reviews fully close, and if they do close, it may either be the next day after HCMO review or it could be months down the road. Next slide, please. Through all of our work, HCMO is guided by the Oregon Revised Statute, Oregon Administrative Rules, which we are here today to discuss, the OHPB approved guiding principles and framework, and the OSA sub-regulatory guidance. And all of those links are also provided in the chat for your review. Next slide, please. So about the Rules Advisory Committee. So a RAC is used to seek input to the maximum extent possible during the development of proposed rulemaking prior to giving notice of intent to adopt, amend, or repeal an administrative rule. A RAC allows the public and interested parties to provide input and suggestions during the development of new rules, amendment, or repeal of existing rules, and the fiscal impact of the proposed rulemaking. As a reminder, the RAC's role is advisory and consensus is not necessary. Next slide, please. So our first RAC meeting was held on November 6th, is where we went over our program and rulemaking background, and we started to go through reviewing and discussing suggested rule changes. We do have that meeting recorded, posted online if you'd like to review. Our second meeting is today, so we're going to continue to discuss the rule changes, and then after this meeting, final edits to rule will be submitted to the Secretary of State. Again, based on the rules hearing timeline, there will be additional opportunity for feedback in 2026. Next slide, please. We will start to go over our draft rules. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarah.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us today and appreciate everyone's patience and accommodation because we rescheduled this RAC to December. So for today's meeting, we have provided a summary of all of the feedback and suggested rule changes that we have received through December 4th, along with notes about how the input has been addressed. So I want to be really clear with everyone that feedback received after December 4th is still under consideration. It's just not in the draft, the second draft of the red line rules for today, and it's not in the document that we've compiled. So we wanted to provide this because we wanted to have some transparency just as we're working through all of the feedback that you all and other members of the public are providing, and to acknowledge that a substantial number of the comments and suggestions that have been provided would require statutory change and cannot be addressed through this rulemaking process. So we've tried to acknowledge that throughout that document as possible, just so you have an understanding of why certain suggestions were maybe not addressed or incorporated. We plan to provide a similar document, maybe continuing to update this document, maybe a new document because this one's already 100 pages long, but a new document that tracks additional feedback that we've received after December 4th and additional comments that come in after today's RAC meeting. Next slide, please. So for today, we're going to do 2 things and we're breaking the content up a little bit. So we want to start with reviewing the proposed rule changes that we didn't get to in RAC 1. So we have a couple of rule sections that we ran out of time for that we're going to go over very briefly because there were not substantial changes to those sections. We're going to spend the bulk of today's meeting reviewing the proposed rule changes in the second draft, which does include the proposed fee schedule. And we are going to present a little bit of information about the fees. There were a number of comments and questions in the first RAC, as well as in the written comment, requesting information about HCMO's budget and other costs. And so we're going to provide some of that in more of a presentation style before we get to the fee discussion. And then just process check, we will update the proposed rule draft again after today's meeting based on the comments that we received, and there'll be a third draft of the proposed red lines that will be submitted to the Secretary of State. All right. Any questions or comments? Tom, I see your hand. Hang on a sec while we unmute you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for this. And we do like the messages about the statutory changes. That helps a lot in looking at the public comment. I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity? Is this just really, again, listening versus an opportunity for a back and forth that we have a question? There can be a little back and forth on this, or is it just we say what we say and you listen like in some other situations? I think that when there's no back and forth, there's a lot of lacking possibilities here. And then there was a lot of no's in the public comment. We didn't do this, didn't do that, didn't do that. So I understand there's a pathway forward. I would make the statement noticing in the summary there that no comprehensive views were completed. That looks pretty, I don't know, amazing that none. I would also then say that one of the guiding principles of this should be our constitutional right to health care. I'll keep emphasizing that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Jessica?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. And I just wanted to also kind of follow up on what Tom was saying about, there were a number of things that I think were requested in the public comment. Appreciate things that are statutory aren't things that can happen here. But it seemed like there were some that didn't have a statutory prohibition, but things like requests for data, et cetera, were not provided here. And so I am just wondering whether the agency will consider, again, depending on how we do in getting through things today, whether to have another conversation with this group to talk about some of those things that were requested as part of the public comment so that we can have a better understanding of kind of what those things are. And we didn't get through the drafts in the last RAC, and man, there are some pretty substantial changes coming into this one, particularly the fee schedule. And so I just am wondering whether we're going to have a chance to maybe have another conversation, because it seems like there's a lot of substance here that 2 hours isn't going to be enough to get through.
Thanks, Jessica. Sierra?
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely want to echo Jessica's comments. We might need additional time for this conversation, but also just to add a little bit more specificity with that, the Hospital Association had requested additional information regarding the program costs and the amount of fees around outside advisors. And the reason for this is because we find it is imperative to understand the true costs to this program and understanding how that affects the fee structure, which we find to be exorbitant. And so we'll have further conversations on that, but we are troubled by the lack of transparency around the true costs for this program. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Jeff?
Thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't think we got a request to put it in the chat if we were here on the rack, but I think the chat was disabled, so we didn't do that, which is fine with me, but I'm just following up on that request. And I just want to make a quick process note about just process for now. If this is advisory or consultative, it doesn't really feel that way. That document you mentioned with the public comment received and the analysis to date seems fairly subjective and on the agency's behalf. I don't think that any of the substantive comments we made were really considered either in that document or in the red line that you sent. There was some trite things around the edges, which I appreciate that you second thought some of the things, but most of the content, the substantive content doesn't seem to have been considered. So I don't know how we're being, I hear you not really answering questions again today, so I don't know how we're advisory or consultative. I don't know where. I thought I read civil penalties, and we'll go through that new fining power for OHA with no additional accountability or oversight or transparency. And I didn't see that in the public comment anywhere. It seems like the public comment has largely been set aside as it relates to substance. The process has been hard to engage. Like you said, the meeting last time was canceled the day before. The fees were not released in the last meeting. There's been a lot of transparency issues with the agency and the public process today alone that are making it hard to even consider, the giant fee increases also being considered. So just need to put that on the record, I think.
Thanks, Jeff. Anyone else want to chime in here before we either respond or start getting into content? All right, I'm not seeing any other hands up. So maybe in response to all of those comments directly, again, appreciate everyone's patience with the rescheduling. We had a lot of comments that we wanted to work through and appreciated the extra time for that. We do have information about the program budget and costs in the presentation for today, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to that section. And I think we are not going to commit at the top of this meeting to whether or not we're holding a third RAC meeting. We encourage you all to continue to submit public comment. The document summary that we provided today, the summary of public comment that we provided for today's meeting was to really provide tracking so you knew what changes had been incorporated and what had been responded to. This is not a final draft. There is still opportunity for public comment. We appreciate /RAC member input. We appreciate all of the time that you've spent and reviewing and providing input. We are taking that very seriously and request that you continue to provide information in writing. The document that we shared as a summary was whether or not changes had been incorporated into the second draft of the rule, which is where we are in the process. Jessica, hang on a sec while we...
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I just want to be really clear. We can submit another round of comments after this is over, and they might or might not be considered for the next version of the rules that are going to be submitted.
You are welcome to submit additional comments throughout this rulemaking process. I think, and I'll say this again a couple times through this meeting, we are going to ask for sort of a soft deadline of additional written comments for OHA to incorporate into the third draft of the rules by mid-January. I think January 16th is our sort of soft deadline. Certainly, you can continue to provide comment after that. There's the process through the Secretary of State with a rules hearing and additional public comment. But we're putting sort of a marker in of we'd like comments over the next few weeks before we incorporate that into the third draft and move forward. So absolutely, yes, please submit comment. I do want to put a slight asterisk on that, though. We've been doing rulemaking for several years now with HCMO, and a number of organizations and RAC members and public commenters have resubmitted the same comment multiple times. And I understand and appreciate that you feel like that comment has not been addressed yet, and so you're resubmitting it. And it also makes it challenging for us to work through because if you're submitting comments on rules from 2021, that's not the current draft rule language, and it just means a lot to sift through. So you are welcome to continue to submit comment. You are, of course, within your right to resubmit comment that you've already submitted and ask us to take another look at that. None of this is binding or final at this stage in the process. And as people continue to resubmit previous comments, I really ask that you check whether or not if that still reflects the current rule language in actual rule or in the proposed draft that is moving forward, if that makes sense.
It sure does. I really hope that OHA is taking care to, I hope that comment is meant more generally and not specifically to my client who has always submitted exactly what's in front of them. So
this comment is not directed at anybody. I would note that we've
you.
received hundreds of pages of comments. And
Thank you.
It has been a lot to sift through, and I just want to make sure everyone today hears from us that OHA is reading and considering all of those comments. They might not all be adopted or incorporated or addressed in the second draft. They might not all be adopted, incorporated, or addressed into a subsequent draft, but we are absolutely taking them into consideration.
Thank you.
Jeff, did I see your hand up briefly? Did you want to jump in here?
Sure. It, it's tough again about the process point because it doesn't look like we did submit comment with and spent time thinking about it, and it doesn't seem like it was genuinely. We don't see it reflect what we see reflected. We don't see in the public comment. I don't understand. It would be helpful to understand more from the agency about like how the new fining fee and the totaling are going to work together because that didn't come up in public comment from anyone, and I'm not seeing where it seems like the substantive changes are coming just from the agency. I'm not seeing anybody else, proposing the major changes that are going on, and so I'm understanding more about the agency's reasoning for these changes, which give more power to y'all to run the program with no additional accountability, oversight, or transparency, no, analysis of the program to date or impacts of none of having the comprehensive reviews all be timed out. Like it just seems like we're
Yep.
having a process issue here with
Yeah,
continuing to
Jeff,
submit comment.
I'm gonna stop you there because I want to move into the content, and I would like to also just make one more point that there are several comments. I say several. There are many comments in the document, especially related to tolling, that are still pending. We have not made changes in the second draft. We are still considering additional changes. They're explicitly labeled as we have not made a decision one way or another on that. So I just want to acknowledge that there are comments in the public comment summary to date that don't have a yes, no at this stage. Want to acknowledge that we're going to get a lot of comment today as well as after today. I expect that many of you and other members of the public will submit additional written comment. That's very helpful. Please continue to do that, and we will continue to move forward. So I'm going to move us into the content at this point. We're going to treat this section same way that we've done, same way that we did at the first RAC meeting. I'm going to briefly introduce each change. We're going to go rule section by section, and we'll pause for comments on each section. We have a lot of content today, to your points already. There's a lot we want to cover, so I might move us forward pretty quickly through some of this, especially this first section, which is still wrapping up from RAC 1. So next slide, please. Changes we didn't discuss at RAC 1. Next slide. Starting with section 0075, contested case hearings. So this is the original red lines from RAC 1. We are proposing adding language to describe how the contested case hearing process works for the civil penalties, which is the newly added section 0067, which we will discuss later as part of changes for RAC 2. And this proposed addition mirrors the process for existing contested case hearings for other healthcare market oversight program orders, and it's the same process required by the Administrative Procedures Act. Next slide. I'm going to go through these three together and then stop for comment. So next section is 0080, compliance with conditions and information requests. So this was a housekeeping edit to remove information requests from the section and create a new section 0085 information requests. So essentially breaking this up into two parts, each with their own headers. And then finally, next slide, section 0085 information requests. OHA is proposing clarifying that entities must respond to additional information within the timeframe outlined by OHA. The previous rule language said promptly, didn't really define what promptly meant. In practice, OHA gives the entities a specific number of days or a due date to respond by, and this aligns the rule language with the current practice. So I'm going to stop there. Are there any comments or reactions to any of these three remaining sections from RAC 1 before we go into the second draft red lines? Jessica, please.
Yeah, so I am concerned when we look at the information request. I mean, we don't have any particular heartburn around changing promptly to within the time frame. That's we've always viewed that as that's what promptly is within the time frame, unless the time frame is undoable. And but frankly, what we would say is that we think, based upon our experience, that a number of these information requests could be combined. That the agency could be asking for more information upfront in one ask instead of specifying that a lot of the second and third requests are not things that, well, we got information in round one, and so now we need additional information based upon the first request. But there are things that we could have asked in the first round and didn't. So from a process and improvement standpoint and how we speed this up standpoint, really working to find a way that the agency can ask for all of that going in would improve things for everyone, the agency, the applicants, the whole process. And so that we would say that as a process improvement place. I'm not sure that there's another place that I'll have a chance to say that. So I did want to put that on the record. But secondly, the addition of the failure to comply will result in a civil penalty to us seems unnecessary. The whole purpose of this is so that we can get through the process as expeditiously as possible so that we can move forward with conditions or no, or not at all with a transaction. Speed is essential. You gotta have enough time to do the process, but for us, time is access for patients. The reason that we're doing this in the first place is because a change is necessary. The status quo is no longer doable. So to say to us, not answering an information request, to us, we know if we don't do that, we can't move forward. And that's costing, in addition to the resources that we're having to spend at the agency, which are based upon the fee increases going to be substantial. We're also paying private attorneys and consultants and others to get through this. It's not to say, in addition to that, we're going to put civil penalties on you. Seems unnecessary when we know that if we don't respond and we aren't timely, that we're going to find ourselves with a no at the end of all of this. And that's a huge waste of everyone's resources. So I don't understand why we're talking about civil penalties. And if you want us to wait until we talk about that, when we talk about 6-7, that's fine. But I just want to raise that now as an objection. Thank you.
Understood. And yes, I would like to hold additional discussion about 6-7 until we get to 6-7, if that's okay with everyone. Just because there are some additional changes and some context that I'd like to add to that when we get there. Tom, please.
Let's see. I think you need to ban and change and eliminate, skip over 6-7 now in light of the current framework of things. But I just want to say that in terms of the, I maybe have lost my track here where this is, but when you talk about contested case, something's been decided and you have an opportunity to go forward. These decisions, well, again, the hospitals are so important in the service, all this stuff, but it's not just those people providing the care and but individuals are out there being impacted by these decisions. And is there a place in this document that allows individuals to go forward and say, this is not right for us or a group of individuals, rather than those that have been involved in the discussion? So if you could just let me know, is there a place, am I missing out on that? And that will be then for future comment.
Thanks, Tom. I think what you're asking relates to if individuals, community members, patients, health plan members, whoever, essentially have a right to bring a contested case hearing about a decision. Is that really what you're asking? Yeah. Okay. And Corrine, stop me if I'm wrong. As currently written and structured, no. The contested case hearing process is not applicable to individual private right of action. Tom, hold on. Can we unmute Tom?
Okay. Is that the place it would go if it was to be put in there? Is that the section or be some other section?
I don't know the answer to that live, so
okay.
put
Thank
a
you.
pin in that, please. Okay. Tim.
Yeah, thanks. Most of my comment was related to the civil penalties issue, but I do just want to raise the asymmetry here of the significant requirements for the parties to respond timely to RFIs and similar, but no similar even guidelines for OHA to respond and review those timely and accept them as complete. We've now gone through this process several times, both in the preliminary and comprehensive review process, and there are oftentimes significant and unexplained delays between the submission of documents and the acceptance of them as complete or receiving feedback. We totally understand that OHA has a big job and that it's not easy to go through the voluminous documents that are being asked for. But what I would posit is that OHA can target its questions such that they receive responses that are targeted to the issues that OHA is most concerned about, and in that way make everybody's life in this process easier. And it would be greatly beneficial to the transparency and workability of the process if OHA put guidelines in place for itself in terms of timely responses so that the parties can from OHA itself so that the parties can adequately plan, especially in the context of tolling.
Thanks, Tim. Jeff.
It seems like there is a larger, more context you're going to share around tolling and timeline stuff and the civil penalty, and we're going to get to it. So I will be quiet until then, Sarah. I'll sit on my hands, but I'll raise my hand and say I really agree with Tim. I don't know the best way to do that quickly so you get it, but really strongly agree with everything Tim just said.
Thanks. Tom.
I'll just throw my comment in here since this has to do with costs and penalties. And we know, and we have one group of people here, and then we have on the outside world out there, the private equity, big insurers and all this stuff. They have all the money in the world, these penalties, these fees, I don't know how you take care of that imbalance where some can, as we know historically, can pay millions of dollars in fines and not even be bothered by it in their world. And that is not necessarily true in terms of the cost structure that may be and the penalties that may be applied here. So I don't know, because we do have the big private equity, big insurers, I'll name United, coming into this world, taking over things. These penalties mean nothing. These are small pittance to them, while they may be very impactful for those who are on this call.
Thanks, Tom. All right, I'm going to move us into the second draft of the red lines for today and start working through these sections. So next slide. Just a process check. So the second draft of red lines includes all of the red lines from the first RAC, everything that you looked at and responded to initially. And then we've also highlighted in yellow the additional changes that have been made between the first and second RAC. So hopefully that makes it just a little bit easier to see what has changed. Red line version management is always fun. So just letting you know that that's what the highlights are in the document. So starting with the next slide, first section 0000, scope and purpose. We are proposing several red lines here to align the scope and purpose with the Oregon Health Policy Board revisions to the framework that they recently reviewed and approved in October 2025. Pause here for a minute to see if there are any comments. Jessica and then Mark.
Yeah, I just respectfully, we absolutely agree with the existing E, but I don't understand why ensuring the sustainability of the program is being added as a goal, or the scope and the purpose of this law, or these rules. That doesn't. I don't think I've ever seen a program put into its rules that one of the scopes and purposes of the rules themselves is the sustainability of the program. I respectfully, that doesn't seem appropriate. The sustainability of the Oregon health system should be a goal. That's what this law was about when it started, was making sure that Oregons have access to healthcare. And that, I think we all share that goal, but the sustainability of the program itself, we would object to that.
Thanks, Jessica. Mark.
Yes, thank you. Mark Bonanno, Oregon Medical Association. I had a similar comment to Jessica on E, so I won't go into that again. But back up to C, ensuring the transaction entity's accountability to the community and its needs. Not clear what the legal standard is there and what that means. It feels like there's a significant amount of potential risk associated with 3C. And really, as you get to the point where your counsel with the Department of Justice is reviewing this, we'd really like to see what that kind of means, how that would be interpreted. But it does seem to stand up a potential risk to the applicants in this process. And the only other thing I'll add, I could have done that in a for the record comment in the chat, but it's disabled today. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Charlie, then Tom.
All right, I've been unmuted. I mean, I would just say from our perspective, it's good that the program is thinking about how to sustain itself, especially so that it doesn't have to rely on general fund dollars and can be self-sustaining. So, I mean, all these look like smart changes to us from a consumer perspective.
Tom?
I want to give a little bit of the thoughtfulness to what Jessica said, which was, yeah, I mean, the idea, the big picture probably is where this needs to be, not it'd be great if this program wasn't even needed, but ensuring just a program itself, I don't know. And then hearing what Charlie said differently. I kind of go back and forth now. I like the Department of Justice stuff that it's put in there, but I want to say that I think later in the document, again, because you lose track of where the document is, that anything to do with any charitable organization needs to involve the Department of Justice since they oversee charitable. So wherever that might come in down the line, that comes into importance. So thank you.
All right, Jeff, and then Sierra.
I just had maybe a question, or I can make it a request if that's helpful. Regarding E in the DOJ, the sentence says in collaboration with DOJ, and I'm not sure if the relationship is DOJ is kind of your client as HCMO, and they operate on your behalf as you instruct, kind of in that client, consumer or agency framework, or the rule is being interpreted literally here, where their expertise as a collaborator is being brought to the table, given their legal expertise and their role as like others have mentioned in other adjacent programs, and would vote for it be their expertise versus just the typical client relationship, if that's and maybe just you could clarify. I'm not sure.
Jeff, I will lightly clarify. There are multiple relationships and collaboration with the Department of Justice. Depending on the transaction, whether or not charitable activities is involved, Department of Justice is our general counsel for the program itself. So I think collaboration is a broad term here that reflects multiple programs and purposes. Sierra?
Yes, thank you. I just want to say that the Hospital Association agrees with many of the points that are being raised, particularly around 3C and questions about E. And really, the concern here is that overall, this program is increasing healthcare costs across the state. And so it really begs the question of how is OHA simplifying and streamlining this program to make it more affordable and effective, I would say both for the agency and also for the healthcare system at large. And with that, we're just concerned about this program straying from the legislative intent. And we really do believe that this portion in particular regarding the scope and purpose should have some acknowledgement for how it is important for the HCMO program to expeditiously review transactions in order to achieve its mission and to support the healthcare system.
Thanks, Sierra. I'm going to move us to the next section. I do encourage folks to provide these comments, other comments in writing as well, although we are capturing this conversation today. So let's go to the next slide. Section 05, definitions. So we've made one housekeeping change here, where the language that was previously in subsection 28 was moved into section 14 for clarity. So no change to the underlying language, just where the language is in the rule. And this was a direct response to some comments about potential redundancy or confusion between 28 and 14. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about definitions together. We also have a new definition, or a substantially revised definition, for health equity. So this is something we've received comments on essentially since the first rules in 2021, that the definition of health equity in rule did not align with the Oregon Health Policy Board's adopted definition. We have made some language changes. I want to acknowledge that this is still not verbatim the Oregon Health Policy Board's adopted definition, and that is based on advice that OHA has received from the Department of Justice against adopting it verbatim, because the Oregon Health Policy Board definition is aspirational and future-looking. So we're looking for a definition here that can be more operational, and that we can use in conducting those reviews, applying conditions, whatever that looks like, that is not future-looking. So hopefully this addresses some of the comments in bringing that closer to alignment with the policy board's definition, while still maintaining an operational feasibility. Any comments on the definitions section? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Let's go to the next section. Section 15, materiality standard. So we have a minor copy edit here that is removing redundant language around market share. Any comments on this change? Jessica, please.
Yeah, I just want to double and triple check, and I know that you don't want to have a back and forth here, but I'm hopeful that you might be able to answer this, or that the agency can provide in writing clarity that from their perspective, this makes no substantive change, that this is a copy edit only.
I believe it is our intention that this is a copy edit only.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, I'm gonna keep us moving. So the next section is section 30, and it is the requirement to file a notice. And I'm gonna just hold on this because we're gonna do all of this together with the fee schedule. So noting that we're going out of order briefly. So next slide is section 42, the optional application for determination. We have added a clause into 6A in response to many of the comments that we received at and after RAC 1, so that the letter of determination would be published under A if the transaction proceeds and is publicly available. So we had a lot of comments back about transactions that were not publicly known and needing to maintain confidentiality around that. And so we've made this change to in response to that. Sierra.
Thank you. The Hospital Association still finds this wording unclear, and it would be helpful to have a second look at it for adding clarification. And can you talk a little bit more about what the standard here would be around is publicly available? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my general standard is, can I find it with a quick Google search? Although that's not a formal sub-regulatory guidance statement, but is it basically available online? Is a working definition. Tim?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Echoing Sarah, I think we're missing a couple of words. It's information about the transaction is publicly available. Just a word choice thing there. Secondly, there should be some language in here about the information that is disclosed in the determination should be publicly available. So it's not just that there's a transaction is publicly available, but that information about the transaction that is disclosed pursuant to the publication of the letter is publicly available and potentially redacting that information that is not otherwise publicly available.
Thanks, Tim. I really welcome any specific suggested language you have here. Tom?
Thanks for the comments on this so far. I'm just trying to figure out, and maybe what the exception is. When would the delay in the public be, once this stuff starts, in terms of the public knowing what's going on? Where does something get put off, till way down the line? Is there a way of understanding that better?
So this section is written is OHA would publish the determination letter, whichever comes first, A, B, or C. And so we're only talking about a potential change to A, but I encourage you to look at that full section of what happens in that time frame. All right. Any other comments on this? Okay, seeing no hands. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Next slide is section 45, form and contents of notice. So we have added some new language to clarify. Again, this is in response to public comment that a party or parties subject to review can request a pre-filing conference, a comprehensive review conference, or other conference at any time during the review period. So there were some questions about when and what pre-filing or conference reviews were available. And so we wanted to be very explicit in rule that there can be a conference at any point during that review period. Jeff.
Yeah, I think we may have made a comment about this, and I'm sorry to say this is a bit of the example. We asked for these conferences to have, some more meaning behind them, meet the timeline, have some standards, be constructive in order to move the transaction forward, not just to be able to request them, which I think you're saying is already allowed and we're just codifying in rule, but having some structure and accountability to these meetings so that they are able to move the needle a little bit, both in timeline and instruction, maybe some sideboards or something like that. So it's a good use of everyone's time, including the agency's best use of resources and all. Just something to think about as you're considering putting this in language.
I do want to respond, and this is something in the public comment summary document that I think we've referenced a couple times. There were multiple comments submitted that suggested that the conferences should include some specific things, and at least one of them is a suggestion that OHA would provide standards. Sorry, I'm going to get the language. I'm not reading it. So it was like standards or language or metrics that an entity could demonstrate to prove that the transaction was in the public interest or would meet criteria. And it's OHA's position that it's very clear that the burden is on the entities. Statutorily, the burden is on the entities to demonstrate that the transaction is in the public good, not on OHA to provide the path for an entity to check the boxes. Jeff, then Sierra, and Tim.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Sarah. Unfortunately, there doesn't appear to be an adjudicator in the space. None of the comprehensive reviews have ever gotten any judgment of their worth by the agency. There's been no accountability. They've all been zeroed out on timeline. So I hear you saying it's on the entities to prove their case, kind of, but you're the judge. And when you never take the case and they all go way past the 180 days that is identified in statute as the goal, and you never have to say anything about them, we never know. The public never knows what would have been or what is or what's going on here.
I would like to correct one of your statements that OHA does not agree or accept that all transactions have zeroed out on timeline, for the record. I'm going to move on to Sierra, then Tim.
Yes, thank you. That actually was in response to one of the hospital association's comments, and I'm not sure it addresses the concerns. I would just echo what Jeff was saying, where if an entity has the burden of proof, but it is unclear how they can prove that and how they can meet OHA's expectations for proving that, then I'm not sure how an entity is intended to navigate the process successfully and in a timely manner.
if there are specific if there is specific suggested language, would welcome seeing what that looks like. Tim?
Yeah, sounds like we've got a chorus here. Just responding to your comment that the burden is on the parties. We have to file documentation and put something in front of you that's going to be persuasive. If we don't know what standard we're going for, how we cannot do that. It all is also kind of evidenced in the process by which the comprehensive reviews are occurring, where we get series after questions that are on disparate issues, seemingly in a fishing expedition for information that is going to a standard which we are not sure about. And it seems like the agency isn't sure about, frankly, because of the nature of the questions and how disjointed they tend to be and how many different areas they're covering. I would submit that the agency would have a much more efficient process and a much easier process if they were to say at the outset what their concerns are about the transaction and then how the parties can address them. And then so instead of going about asking for information kind of in the backward sense of, hey, give us this information so we can figure out what our concerns are, it's here's our concerns, please give us the information necessary so that we can resolve those concerns. And if the parties can't do it, that's what the condition authority is for. So echoing what I think Jeff and Sierra said, and also really encouraging the agency to think about how it can make its life easier in these reviews much quicker, which I think would be through a more deliberative and prescriptive process of understanding what the concerns are and letting the parties demonstrate that they can address those concerns.
Thanks, Tim. Jessica?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to echo what Tim said. I think we understand that the statute was written, so we've got to be able to prove it. But we need to know what it is that what you would deem sufficient for us to prove, so that we're not in a perpetual game of go fetch a rock, which I don't think is what the agency wants, but it could be part of what's leading to the cost associated with this program, and the timeline. Because if we're not really sure, it's on the entities to prove it, but we don't know how to do that sufficiently, then what we're doing is spending a lot of time spinning a wheel instead of getting really clear about what are those questions that you have and how is it that we can answer them so that it's well understood what we're trying to achieve, what the transaction will and won't do, and whether or not components of the transaction actually cause concern or not. And I just think that there are better ways for us as the state and this community that is doing our best to try and figure out how to make changes in how we operate to respond to the signs of the times that we're in right now, where there are real financial challenges for entities. We are trying to continue to serve Oregonians, making sure that we're doing that in a way that the agency will approve said transaction requires us to all have a really clear set of benchmarks about how we get there. And that's not a box checking exercise. It's clarity so that when we come to you the first time, we're providing you the information you need to make a clear determination that our proposals reflect the goals of the organization, and that we've built in metrics that will then meet the goals of this program. Without all of that, we're guessing into the blind. And that's not, that is wasteful of the agency's resources. That's wasteful of the health entity's resources. And that's not in any patient's well-being. That's money spent on lawyers and consultants and others. And I am a consultant, but I will tell you that that's not the best use of the healthcare dollar. The best use of those dollars is putting money into the community. And we can only do that if we get through this process expeditiously. And that requires us to have clarity on how we achieve those outcomes. So I don't think that anybody's goal is to just check a box. I mean, maybe there are some. Those people aren't on this call. For the people who are here, who are trying to do the right thing, we need clarity from the agency, and that I think still puts the onus on us to do it, but enables us to do that while also meeting your timelines and not wasting your time. And I hope we can find a better way to collaborate on that.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, Tom and Charlie, and then I want to move us to the next section because we have a lot to cover still.
Hearing that, I think just as somebody going into whether this meets the public interest, I think not having that list, not just for the organizations trying to do the work, but for us to see up front, this is what they're trying to do. This is what they have to do, would also be really, really good. It's either an and, or an or, however that's listed. I just think it's a really good idea to create a very clear, a lot of clarity across the board for this, including what was just the comments for those that are trying to do the right thing. Thank you.
I would just say, I mean, as from an outside perspective, following this program over the past couple of years, I mean, it seems to me that entities have been able to navigate it pretty easily, given that every preliminary review has been approved, and only 6 have gone to comprehensive review. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't been in any of these conversations, but from an outside perspective, it looks like the criteria are pretty clear. And entities have been able to pretty consistently, successfully demonstrate that they're hitting that criteria. And then there have been a couple instances that have gone to comprehensive review, which, I mean, a lot of them have been withdrawn before OHA can even make a determination. So, I don't know. It seems to me that I know this isn't, it is kind of like a proposal in this conversation on the table to add language, and I'd be interested to see what it would be, because I think clarity is important. But at least from an outside observer perspective, the conversation here seems to be kind of conflict with what the kind of the observation seems to be from my perspective.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to move us on. I do ask that if there's specific proposals here, that maybe commenters who are who've been chiming in on this provide a little more specifics. I think that would be helpful for the agency's consideration in what you're envisioning this process would look like. Okay, I also want to acknowledge for a second that we are having some technical difficulties because a number of you have told us you haven't been able to chat. From our end, it is on. Everything looks like it's enabled, and so I don't know what's going on, and I don't know that we can fix it live. So apologies for that, everyone. We will take attendance the best we can off of the participant list, and we encourage you to continue to submit comments over email. Sorry that we don't have the chat as operational as we hoped for today. So next slide. We're still in section 0045, the form and contents of notice. We have made a change in response to a number of comments that came in after the first RAC, and this section now includes references to the draft definitive agreements. So we've walked back the proposal that it would be final executed definitive agreements or final definitive agreements only. We now include draft throughout this section. Sierra.
Thank you. We appreciate that OHA is moving away from having the final definitive agreements as at the start of the process, but we are still concerned about even requiring a draft agreement, with that being a significant ask. And we're also concerned about the other portion, the other change in this rule around requiring that the transaction become effective no later than 60 days from the date that the authority issues its final order. We are unclear why OHA is determining this timeline, and it is incongruent with how business practices work. Thank you.
Sarah, let me stop you because I want to actually intro that and describe that change. And then, so maybe I paused for comments too early. So let's go to the next slide. Again, one more change in section 0045. We are adding a new clause, proposed clause sub 12, an approved material change transaction must become effective within a period that begins 60 calendar days from the date of which OHA issues its final order. So couple of things that are involved in this section. So we're essentially creating a window that says the final order approval with conditions is effective for a certain period of time. And if the entities do not close within that period of time, OHA automatically withdraws that order. And so why are we proposing this and how does it work are probably your immediate questions. So we've received several transactions where the transaction did not close immediately or soon after the review. And then in some of those transactions, the final agreement and terms differed quite a bit from what HCMO had originally reviewed and based the approval or conditional approval on. And so we had to then go back and essentially re-review the transaction. This is why we had previously discussed the final agreement language. And so that argument, that concern still stands for this section as well. So in terms of how it works, if a transaction doesn't close in that 60 days, and maybe 60 days is the wrong timeline, very open to feedback on that. Do entities have to resubmit a notice and start over? So no. What we're envisioning here is that entities could say, we'd petition to reinstate the order. Nothing has changed. Everything should still stand. We're good to go. And that would be an option. However, if the definitive agreements have materially changed since approval, then we'd have some different options, which would include whether or not it's essentially a new transaction at that point. So I hope that provides a little context. Sierra, I know you were commenting on this and I cut you off, so I want to go back to you first if you want to continue on concerns, and then we'll go Sabrina and Tim.
I think that my earlier comment fully summarized just our concerns that this is incongruent with how business practices work, and also with this entire process. I'll leave it at that for now. I'm sure others have a further comment on this.
Okay, thanks. Sabrina.
Hi, thank you. Sabrina Reeves with the Oregon Independent Medical Coalition. I think we would echo much of what Sarah has already said. I think 60 days is definitely far too short of a time frame, and we'll take a little bit to digest this context that you just provided, Sarah. Thank you for that, and then provide some additional comments in writing, but we do have concerns there.
Tim?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I think that this provision is internally inconsistent with the statute. The statute says the parties need to file 180 days in advance of closing. OHA has 30 days to review. Then they need to close the transaction within 60 days. That means they have to close the transaction 90 days after filing. And that does not align with the requirement to file 180 days in advance. So I think this is fundamentally not in line with the statutory framework. And again, that exemplifies the real problem here. Like, OHA has an issue, which is that there can be material changes to a transaction after approval. The order is specific to the transaction as reviewed, right? So the parties don't have the authority to change the transaction and close it. If they change the transaction, OHA already has the authority to say, well, that's not the transaction we approved, so you cannot close the transaction and need to go through. Transactions can be delayed closing for many, many reasons, and it shouldn't be simply up to the discretion of OHA whether a simple delay in closing that does not change the material terms at all can potentially result in a restarting of a review process. And I don't want to pre-stage our comments in the future, but a review is potentially, a $30,000 to $90,000, even for preliminary review because of the follow-up reviews, $90,000 proposition. And so OHA is effectively giving itself the discretion after 60 days to impose additional fees on individuals when the parties when no substantive things have changed. So this provision seems to be a lack of concordance between the concern, which is transactions might change after approval, and what we're trying to do, because OHA already has that authority and it doesn't have anything to do with the delay. Thanks.
Thanks. Tom Sanchez.
Hi, good afternoon. Tom Sanchez, the Oregon Clinic. just to comment on the 60 calendar days, and as others have said as well, it's just impractical from a real world closing perspective, and lots of work that has to happen in order to actually close those transactions. So I think that that date would need to be at least 180 days.
Okay. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Again, just for the record, I agree with what Tim and Tom just said. I also think, getting back to something Jessica raised earlier, we would like to submit written comments at the close of this RAC, and I'm assuming is there a different timeline for that so that we can just be more efficient in getting our information in front of the OHA here?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me restate or share again what I shared. I think public comment, RAC member comment, welcome throughout this whole rulemaking process, which will likely go into February and March. That said, OHA is requesting any responses or feedback on the second draft red lines by January 16th so that we can incorporate changes into the third draft red line. Okay, let me move on because there's one more proposed change to section 45. Next slide, please. We are also proposing adding sub 13. A party to an approved material change transaction must notify the authority within 7 days in the event of a proposed transaction that has failed or been abandoned. And the reason for this is closing a loop where we, after having issued an approval, are theoretically on the hook to conduct follow-up reviews. The follow-up reviews are triggered when the transaction closes. And so many entities reach out and notify us and say, yep, we confirm the transaction has closed. And if the transaction hasn't, entities don't necessarily let us know that the transaction has been called off. And so we found ourselves repeatedly reaching out to entities saying, hey, we're checking back in. Has the transaction closed or not? And this is looking to have a closed loop on that communication. Jessica.
Yeah, I would just say that I think these are a decision might be made internally to abandon a transaction, but that is not yet public to a lot of people, especially if that happens very late in a transaction status. And so I don't know that I think that when a decision is made versus when we notify the agency versus when it becomes
And
public that a
sorry,
transaction.
Jessica, can I just clarify for your comment?
Yeah.
What we're proposing here is not when it's called off during the review period. This is after OHA has completed the review, the approval order, approved with conditions order is out there. This is fully after the review period, just in case that wasn't clear.
Okay, well that isn't very clear in here, so I would update that. But even after the review is over, it's still internally what a decision is versus when that announcement becomes public information to employees, to others. That may be more than 7 days. And I get that the agency needs to know, but it feels like 7 days feels like an awfully short time frame, or it needs to be within 7 days of it becoming public information or something like that.
Okay. I'm also going to maybe extrapolate what I'm hearing, that there could be some connections or possible things that we could look at, making sure that there's confidentiality protections around this as well.
Yep.
Okay. Jeff.
Yeah, maybe that does it, but I just had a general, this one and the last one, these don't really make sense in the business context of healthcare, and the timelines seems to be a general theme that I don't know if there's a way to correct for. This creates a space where who's going to say how the business is, the thing was terminated. There needs to be a legal thing, and then there's this pressure that you've put on the system to make a 7-day thing, which is a whole new business process. And so I would defer to the business folks, but I think that there's a continual need to look at it from like what's feasible and practical from a business perspective.
And again, I want to be really clear because I think there could be some conflation between this and the 60-day window in sub 12. This has nothing to do with 7 days from the approval date, approval with conditions. This is once the entity knows that the transaction has been called off or has been abandoned, that they would let OHA know expeditiously, which is the 7-day window that we're proposing here. I'm open to, again, alternate suggestions. Please tell us how this doesn't work for the process. But what we're saying is once the entity knows, this is not tied to any date or action on OHA's level. It's so that we don't have to continually reach out to transactions that we are unsure if they have closed or not, or if they are going to close. Okay, any other comments on this section? All right, let's go on to section 50, retention of outside advisors. So one change here, but this change is made throughout the section. In response to considerable comments from the last RAC, we are removing the related costs for document management software from the list of reimbursable outside advisor costs. Pretty straightforward change. Comments? Okay. Next slide. Sorry, I don't know what to do when there aren't comments. Let's go to the next section. 6.2, Community Review Board. So we are also proposing a removal here, removing section 6. The section 6 was about the Community Review Board requesting information, and just want to acknowledge that RAC commenters, you're absolutely correct. It's OHA that has the statutory authority to request the information, not the Community Review Board. So it would be OHA making the request for information if needed to inform the Community Review Board. And OHA already has that language in 0085, and we didn't need to repeat any of that here. So again, thank you for catching that. Hopefully this change makes sense and is in response to comments made. Any comments here? Sorry, hold on, not yet. Tom.
Well, this is one of those things repeated. The idea that somebody can have a conflict of interest and be on one of these boards, it just needs to be pre-screened. If there's a people should make a declaration in their application that they have no conflict of interest, rather than they get on the board and then they declare it. It just does not make any sense that a conflict of interest person in a small group of people would be able to come in and try to, and then be managed within the board itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And I would note for the record that when OHA has convened a community review board in the 2 instances that we've done that, plus the 3rd that we recruited for but didn't seat, we did have a conflict of interest disclosure as part of that application. So it was on the front end. Charlie.
I mean, I just want to make sure that so I hear that the authority lies with OHA to request information, but I think I liked the idea in the spirit of this edition that just explicitly saying that the community review board will get the information it thinks it needs in order to make a determination. So I don't know if it is included elsewhere in the rules that says that will happen. I just would want to avoid a situation where, like a community review board thinks they need some sort of information and then they don't actually have any authority without the blessing of OHA to receive that information.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next section, civil penalties. I know I'm expecting a lot of comment here, so just a couple of framing comments. We did add some clarification and some new language between RAC 1 and 2 in response to comments. And really just to frame this up, the legislature authorized OHA to impose civil penalties in addition to other penalties imposed by law for violation of HCMO statutes and rules. We did not start with civil penalties. We had several years of essentially a grace period where transacting parties were not subject to any of this. We wanted everyone to become familiar with the process. We wanted to understand where there were challenges or potential issues with the process. And we feel like now that everyone is more familiar with how this works, we are coming back to that original authorization to have civil penalties to ensure that we are getting the information that we need to complete the reviews and meet the goals of the program. I will stop for comments here. Who's first? Jessica.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know that that's not much of a surprise. But Sarah, the again, I already raised the $10,000 offense regarding clarifying questions when there's already so much of a that just seems unnecessary. Like the whole point is for us to get through the transaction. And so I don't need to repeat myself there, but I just would reemphasize that. And then I think sub three is also a problem because we may or may not agree. There may be a misinterpretation of what the order required relative to a single element of whatever the condition is. And if there is a disagreement, and you all can start fighting for that, that is, or an unintentional miss, that just feels like to us, it's why would somebody choose at this point to go through this process in order to maintain care and access for Oregonians? The level of risk associated with if there are not just there's one thing to have a flagrant violation. There's an order in place and you just choose not to follow it and just blow everything off. But the most of the errors are not that. They are, we think that doing X is enough, but it's not. It's you want Y. But especially as we're still working to get through and have yet to get through a comprehensive review transaction, we're hopeful that that will happen soon. Should that occur, will those conditions be greater? We don't know. And so again, I think the fear is, are we creating a system where the potential of disagreement
Yeah, I want to just provide a clarification. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I do want to provide a clarification that's in the rest of the section and maybe not on the slide. So the way civil penalties typically work for the agency, right, is that it's a notice of intent to impose a civil penalty. And if it was a misunderstanding, or if if that is something that just needs to be cleared up, then there is a process for that. So I just want to be clear that it's not an automatic, like, here's your invoice, here's your civil penalty. Generally speaking, in the process, it starts with a notice of intent to impose. And if it is due to a miscommunication, it's possible that there would be options to reconcile that.
Yeah, that still sends us into a pretty substantial process, Sarah. I mean, I hear you that it isn't unilateral and that there is a process we can go through. I just think that this feels, first of all, these penalties are really high. Second, I think just given where we are, this feels really onerous, and very broad. This is just really, really broad. And so we would ask you to we don't think that the additions here today are necessary. And we just have a disagreement about that. I want to be really clear about that on the record.
Understood. Thank you. All right. I see lots of hands. So order Tim, Sabrina, Tom, and then Jeff.
Yeah, I'll reserve my comments to the issue of penalties for failing to timely respond. So, timely is not a real intelligible legal standard in advance. We have no idea what that means. I know OHA has a standard process of inserting in its notices a response due date, but if absent that, you would have the authority to simply impose a penalty if you believe that there was not timely. That does not seem appropriate. OHA, if it has standards for responsiveness, they should be set out in statute, especially in regulation, especially if they are going to be the source of penalties. Additionally, I've worked with OHA on deadlines a lot. You guys tend to be quite flexible with advance notice and excuse. There should be a provision in here that makes that explicit, that the parties will not be imposed a penalty if they, provide or are making a reasonable effort or otherwise notify OHA. But again, I think fundamentally, we have a big problem with this provision in its conception. There is a built-in penalty for not responding, which is your transaction doesn't get approved. It does not seem appropriate for OHA to be imposing additional penalties, especially in the context of a process where there is effectively no deadline for approval because of OHA's tolling authority. If OHA was doing this in lieu of a tolling authority, saying that, okay, OHA can't toll, so, we have a deadline, we can't meet it if you don't respond, and that imposed costs on OHA, yeah, that could be reasonable to say, hey, we need parties to be acting timely so that we can meet our statutory obligation. That's simply not the case here. OHA has taken the position that it can decide when its timeline runs and when it doesn't. And so it does not make a whole lot of sense for it then to be also imposing penalties associated with the parties of not meeting a timeliness standard that isn't articulated. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Sabrina.
Thank you. So again, speaking up on behalf of the Oregon Independent Medical Coalition, we have concerns with the introduction of these steep civil penalties. I think especially within the context of the steep fee increases that we're going to be talking about later on. Our clinics are independently owned clinics, they're smaller. And so we've already found this process to be burdensome in terms of cost and also time, but especially in terms of cost. And so the increase of the fees along with these steep civil penalties is very concerning to us.
Thanks. Tom Sanchez.
Yeah, thank you. Tom Sanchez, the Oregon Clinic again, and agree that I think it's the civil penalties that just, as an operator, increase the risk substantially for us as we evaluate transactions. And likely the result is not bringing forward transactions that really make sense otherwise, but things like civil penalties and the fees as well that we're going to talk about really make this process so much more prohibitive, and I think are going to be have the opposite effect that the legislation was looking for.
Thanks, Tom. Jeff.
Sarah, before I start my comment, I just want to ask kind of what Tim kind of was leading to a little bit. Is this in an interplay with the tolling somehow to speed up the timeline so that we can make that statutory goal of 180 days, since we haven't made that yet in any of the comprehensive reviews? Or is this just an additional tool in the tool belt for OHA during the process?
I think I would restate a couple things. One, that we are still looking at tolling language and there are not proposed changes in this draft red line. So stay tuned on that. And we have statutory authority for this and had not included it. So I think, tool in the toolbox is a perfectly valid way to think about this as well.
Okay, then my initial reaction, and I would look forward to hearing more about that tolling. You're right, that could really be a meaningful change. So I do, hold that out. But this seems egregious. This seems like an Oregon is closed for healthcare business type of thing. This is really over the top. There's a process issue with this, seeing this now in the second RAC versus the first RAC. This is a substantial change. I didn't see this in public comment as a specific request. It seems like the agency is self-dealing itself a lot more power with no additional accountability, oversight, transparency, not addressing the tolling, though leaving that out there. I'm hearing you say there might be something coming on the tolling, and that interplay really is critical, and I am open, we are open to that. But on the face of it, it seems really egregious.
And I want to just again clarify that OHA had authority to have civil penalties for the HCMO program from the beginning and had not implemented them for the first couple of years. This could have been part of the initial rulemaking and didn't think it was needed at the time. And I do want to just reflect back, I think maybe in part to Tim's comment and Jeff, what you're saying. If this helps speed up the timelines, that's great. We would love that to be the case. As part of our process, and if there are specific places where some of this could be included in the rule language, I really welcome that feedback. But we do include a deadline or a requested deadline in all of our requests for information. And we do also tend to be flexible. If there's a reason the entity can't make that deadline, we usually have a little bit of back and forth about that. But we do try to provide that, and we do hope that this will improve the timeline as well. Tom Sintek.
mentioned this before, but this is kind of where it comes in, which is for the entities on this call, the local, I'll call them the local entities versus the big private equity, the big insurers. They're speaking about the burden on them versus those bigger companies. This is nothing. And so we create a disparity between the really big dollars out there and our local, providers of care. And this also, I'm wondering how this might fit into the budget, right? Is it a budgetary line item, money collected for civil penalties, in order to meeting that place? And it seems like following all this could be management heavy as well in terms of getting the work done. So that's my comments.
Thanks, Tom. Mark.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. We commented last time, on the penalty provision, and I'll just add it for the record here. This really does shift the HCMO program from a standards-based program, which I think we all sort of understood, and now shift it more into a penalty-based program. And for smaller clinics, particularly, clinics that are at the lower end of the threshold amounts, many of them are still operating at a loss since the pandemic. I mean, and if they need that lifeline, knowing there's going to be fee increases here, but the civil penalty issue could, make folks think twice. And we could be missing out on opportunity where transactions would be beneficial for the public benefit in the community simply because there's now this sort of risk associated because of the penalty-based nature of the program. Also, within the penalty provisions, there seems to be a difference between not responding to information in the application process and maybe violating an order. Two different standards, but the amounts are pretty much in line with each other. So I think that needs to be looked at as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. All right, Sierra, and then I want to move us on to the next section.
Thank you. So I appreciate your efforts to bring some clarification and nuance to all of this. I am concerned though with the approach behind this, that perhaps there could be a little bit more attention to streamlining this overall process. Back to my earlier comment, this seems like an area where there could be a little bit more intentional strategy in looking at how these penalties will impact the overall timeline for the review process. And as you're considering these comments, I really just would encourage you to think more about the overall streamlining this program to make it affordable, effective, and timely, as we see that word come up over and over again throughout this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sierra. Okay, let's go to the next section. Confidentiality and disclosures. We have one minor, one word change in this section in response to RAC comments. So this was the section about whether or not and how OHA would deny confidentiality claims. And the previous draft had said OHA would provide a minimum of 2 business days before releasing any information publicly. And in response to RAC comments, we are changing that to 5 business days. Comments on this change or this section? Okay, seeing none, let's go to the next section. Section 7.5, contested case hearing. This is another one-word date change. So we originally proposed a 15-day period to request the contested case hearing when a civil penalty is imposed. And we are proposing updating that to the 20-day window to align with the Administrative Procedures Act for civil penalties. So a bit of a housekeeping cleanup here. Comments on this section? Okay, next slide. We're on section 80, compliance with condition. So a couple changes. We deleted the previous section 2. This was already in statute and didn't need to be repeated. And then we added new language that mirrors language in section 82 and 85 about requiring that the parties provide information required to verify compliance with conditions. Entities may not refuse to provide requested information, and failure to comply or respond may result in civil penalties. Comments on this section? Jessica.
Yeah, I think that we expect to be able to do that. I think the question, Sarah, and we just really don't know at this point, but I just want to put down kind of a bit of a thumbprint here that we're hopeful that the information reports, analyses, and documentation are fit in the realm of what's reasonable, that we're not in addition to doing the 1 and the 2 and the 5 year analysis and all of that, that we're not in a situation where we're creating a a cost structure where we're asking entities to develop new reports and new documentation and new processes that every year add to the cost of healthcare. That we're not asking folks to have to create a whole bunch of new content. And again, we don't expect to do zero, but we want to make sure that it's balanced and reasonable at the same time.
Thanks, Jessica. Other comments here? Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is section 82 and 85. So for both of these, in both of these sections, we've added the connection to the new civil penalties section. So again, this is the same language that was in section 80 as well, about failure to comply or respond may result in the imposition of civil penalties. Jeff.
Just, adding the civil penalties everywhere with like what Jessica's previous example was, there's no accountability for the agency for reasonableness of the request. It's all still going on this fishing expedition boutique model. And we've been at the program for years now. And I think we need to look at ways where we can kind of meet the goals of the program, better health for people, better health equity, lower costs, without boutique and fishing expeditions as the cornerstone of how we're doing that. And adding civil penalties onto it just seems, kind of punitive.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, one more slide in this section. Next slide, information request, still in 85. Minor clarifying edit. This was a RAC member comment suggestion. For the record, OHA believes this is a copy edit, no substantive changes that we're changing to timely reply within the timeframe outlined by the authority. Comments here, Jeff.
Thanks, Sarah. Is it the authority's policy just making sure that whatever timelines they apply, all of these are told, whatever time frame you apply, that is told?
I am not talking about tolling today. Sorry, I'm not going to answer you live and give you wrong information.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
Tim?
Yeah, a minor copy editing note, but I think the word timely here is redundant and unnecessary. So just say the parties must reply to such requests when the time frame outlined by the authority is clearer. But that's my only comment.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate additional copy edits. Okay, let's pause here. Oh, Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, just because in some areas you have updated to timely means within the time frame outlined by the authority, and I concur with Tim's edit there. It may be useful to just define timely as being within the time frame outlined by the authority, just so that consistently that's what that means, and there's not times where timely means within a time frame and other times where you're potentially on the hook for being fined for not being timely. It's just always, if the authority has set a time frame, you need to respond by the deadline, and if you can't do that, then you need to work that out with the agency so that there's real clarity there. I think would help.
Yeah, so can I just say that back? You're proposing essentially adding timely to the definitions section.
Well, if we're going to use this again, we'd prefer
If
there
it means,
not be.
yeah,
Yep, if you're going to go down that road, I think just being really clear about that then just prevents in some places it's clear, in some places it's not. So yes.
thank you for that. Jeff.
It matters if tolling is involved with this timely definition. Sorry to state the obvious, but if tolling is a part of the agency's definition of timeliness, that would change, or we have more thoughts.
Understood. I acknowledge that you all reserve the right to provide additional comments on tolling. Okay, I'm going to pause here. We are well past the time when we thought we would take a quick break, given that we have about 25 minutes left, and I know we want to talk about fees today. Is everyone okay if we keep going? Okay, thank you all. All right, skipping the 5-minute break, let's get into section 30, which is the requirement to file the notice of material change transaction and the fee schedule. So, next slide. Like I previewed at the top of the meeting, oh, not yet, thanks. RAC members requested some additional information about the costs of operating HCMO, the HCMO budget, and all of that. And so we want to provide a little bit of background information and context so you understand some of the agency's perspective coming into the proposed fee schedule. So let me run through the next couple slides pretty quickly. Apologies for the speed, but want to just get this in front of you and make space for discussion. So next slide. HCMO was directed by the establishing legislation to prescribe by rules fees proportionate to the size of the parties, sufficient to reimburse the cost of administering the program. I'm saying the program 501 is specifically the reviewing material change transactions component of the program. The legislature funded HCMO initially in the 2021 to 2023 biennium with general funds, with the expectation that the program would establish fees and begin collecting fees to cover the costs in future subsequent biennium. And we developed an initial fee schedule as part of the first rulemaking in 2021. Next slide. Developing that initial fee schedule happened before we were reviewing any transactions. And as such, it had a lot of estimates that went into that. So we were estimating program costs based on the 4 FTE that the legislature had originally funded in that first biennium, as well as some anticipated costs for community review boards. We had to estimate the number of transactions that would require review, as well as the number of types of transactions. We had a memo from 2021 that if folks haven't seen might be helpful. So that link is available in these materials. And notably, these estimates didn't include a lot of information. So rulemaking, designing the program, additional components of the program were not part of that. We really were just looking at costs for the staff in the CRB and the number and type of transactions. Next slide. That initial fee schedule initially phased in. Originally, we had proposed that there would be a reduced fee schedule for the first 9 months of the program. Since the program did receive general fund for that period, there was a lot of feedback and concern about that from the RAC in 2021, and we ended up pulling that back. So there were no fees at all for the first 9 months of the program. And then at January 1st, 2023, we went into the current fee schedule, which is still in effect to date, and that is on the screen. Next slide. Just want to acknowledge that there was a lot of feedback from the RAC in 2021 about fees, the concern that fees would have. And there was a lot of that comment provided in 2021. And I just acknowledge that this has been a conversation that the agency has been having with all of you and RAC members and previous RAC members about concerns about the cost of the program since the beginning. That said, and given that input in 2021, next slide, that initial fee schedule that is still in effect today was known to be insufficient from the beginning. So we had done some initial modeling in 2021, and depending on the anticipated number of transactions that may be subject to review, we were looking at covering anywhere from 3% to 60% of program costs based on that model. So knowing that there was no way we were going to be covering costs under the initial fee schedule, we went ahead and adopted that because we wanted to make sure we were addressing costs that were raised during the 2021 RAC about the fees being prohibitive, discouraging innovation and collaboration, all of that conversation. Next slide. That said, we have always intended to revisit the fee schedule. This was signaled initially in the 2021 RAC, but we didn't revisit it last year when we did some minor rulemaking in 2024. In part, that was because we had some interactions with the legislature and we were requesting ongoing general fund to support the program, and we wanted to see how that was going to play out before we revisited the fee schedule. Next slide. That said, we have requested general fund to support the HCMO program twice through policy option packages in both the 23-25 biennium and the 2025-27 biennium. The legislature did not fund either request. Our interpretation is that this is the legislature reinforcing that the program is supposed to be fee funded. Next slide. So to provide a little context for the budget and revenue to date, next slide. This is the budget. Oh, sorry, not yet. This is the budget that went into the requested general fund request for the 2025-27 biennium. About 2.6 million for the biennium, so 1.3 million per year. This would cover 6 full-time positions as well as additional partial staff time that are contributing from other parts of the agency. I do want to note that there is considerable in-kind support that the agency is providing to this program that is not reflected in this line item. We also had a line for services and supplies, just under 800,000 for the biennium, which include the public engagement and community review board supports and Department of Justice costs. Sierra, do you have a question at this point?
Yes, thank you. So this was the requested budget that was approved or not approved by the legislature then?
This was the budget, the request for general fund that was not funded.
Okay, so then to clarify, is the current FTE for the program 4 positions?
The current FTE working on the program? No. There are more than 4 FTE working on the program.
Okay, thank you.
I think a better, maybe an easier way to say this is the HCMO program is currently unfunded, full stop, other than any fees that are collected. And I'm going to share in a second the revenue that we've received. So actually, let's jump ahead to slide 55. Go ahead, one more. So this is all of the fee revenue that we have collected since January 1, 2023. Which is about $474,000. 2 emergency exemption requests, 5 comprehensive review fees, and 40 preliminary review fees. Next slide. This is that same revenue broken out across year. And just want to note that our revenue doesn't necessarily scale to the number of transactions that we're reviewing in a given year. When a transaction files, when the work is happening, doesn't align super neatly with the calendar year. So a lot of what we're doing in 2025, the comprehensive reviews mostly started and the revenue was, the fees were paid in 2024, even though some of that work has continued into 2025. Tim, did I see your hand? Did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that this was excluding advisory reimbursement, but you have this on this slide, so perfect,
Correct.
Thanks.
This is excluding outside advisory reimbursement. Okay, next slide. Just want to note the comprehensive review fees. So we have assessed comprehensive review fees on 5 of the 6 transactions that have gone to comprehensive review. That 6th one was filed before the fee schedule kicked in. The transaction was filed December 2022, and so did not pay a comprehensive review fee. By statute, we're supposed to have a sliding scale based on the size of the entity involved in the transaction, and so this was the sliding scale in the current fee schedule. But I wanted to note that in all 5 of the transactions that went to comprehensive review and paid a comprehensive review fee, the smaller entities' revenue exceeded $500 million. So in other words, we haven't used the sliding scale at this point. All entities that have gone through into comprehensive review have been at that highest level on the comprehensive review fee schedule. And just next slide, one more note on sort of revenue versus the fee schedule. We looked at the annual revenue for the entities that have gone through HCMO review to date. And this is the larger entity and mean entity revenue and the smaller entity compared. And we're in the billions of dollars for that revenue. Noting that there's, we don't have revenue for all of the entities. There's some missing, no, it's not a full picture here, but wanted to say that from our perspective, we are looking at very large entities almost entirely. Sierra and then Jessica, do you have questions?
I have a comment. The Hospital Association finds this slide to be irrelevant to the discussion at hand. Revenue does not match operating expenses or profits, and most hospitals in Oregon are operating in the red at this point. And with the exorbitant fees, if this is the justification, it is very much misaligned with the financial picture for the healthcare system in the state of Oregon, and we find that very concerning.
Thanks, Sierra. Tim?
Yeah, echoing Sarah's comment, the fees should be tied to the actual cost of administering the program, not necessarily charging bigger institutions more simply for the sake of it. The additional thing is that most of the transactions that are coming before OHA are coming before OHA because one or both of the parties is in significant financial distress. The amount of money that is being charged on these needs to be taken into account when entities are executing and considering these transactions. And when entity is in significant financial distress, adding hundreds of thousands of dollars to transaction costs, even if it is a large institution, does have a material impact on the ability of the transaction to pencil. So especially as OHA is considering these fees, we really encourage them to focus on what is practicable based on the limitations of the healthcare system as a whole, not on the revenue of the individuals and individual entities and the potential downstream impacts it can have on a lot of these transactions where the parties are significantly cash constrained.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Tim and Sierra. Acknowledge. Let me use that as a pivot to talk about what we did use as the inputs for developing the new fee model. And for the record, it did not include the annual revenue of entities. This is just context. This did not go into any of the modeling. So let's go ahead 2 slides and talk about what did go into the model. So we have put a lot of work into this. So the HCMO staff have been conducting a time study to better understand the level of effort that's needed by transaction type, by type of activity. Where are we spending our time? How long does it take? Where is that effort going? We also have a much more accurate understanding of the underlying costs to operate the program. Services and supplies, which include things like translation, captioning, community review board costs, how much staff it takes to do the work given the level of review, as well as the cost for legal support through the Department of Justice. We also have a much better understanding of the projected number of annual transactions because we have multiple years of historic experience and we have a sense of sort of how many transactions are going to go to comprehensive review, how many transactions stay in preliminary review. We also are more informed now about what's happening sort of industry-wide. The team spends a lot of time looking at what some of the trends and projections are in terms of, are we expecting more transactions in 2026 nationally? What does the market look like? And how does that factor in? We also ran simulations to better understand various scenarios. So looking at different fee schedules, different projected number of transactions, and how likely those combinations would be to cover the actual operating costs of administering the program. Next slide. So to share, these are the projected number of annual transactions that we used for the model. The model includes sort of a point estimate as well as a minimum maximum. And so looking at 7 determinations, 2 emergency exemptions, 20 preliminary reviews, and 2 comprehensive reviews. That is our working assumption for the model. So all of that led to the new fee schedule, and so I want to talk you through that at a high level on the next 2 slides quickly. Next slide. The first activity is the optional application for determination of covered transaction status. There were no current fees for this. We are not proposing any change to that. We want to encourage entities to continue to engage with HCMO. We think the optional determination process is really helpful, saves everybody time. If a transaction is in fact not reviewable, entities don't need to submit. We don't need to review that submission. And we think we want to maintain that voluntary engagement as much as possible. Second activity is emergency exemption. The current fee is $2,000. We are not proposing any changes to that fee. The third activity on this slide is the preliminary review. The current fee is $2,000. We are proposing $30,000, but want to really make sure everyone hears this, that proposed fee will include legal costs. And OHA will not pass on any outside advisor legal costs to entities during preliminary review. So we are committing to that as part of this increase. Next slide. And then next row here is the comprehensive review. So you can see the proposed fee schedule, current fees and proposed fees still on a sliding scale, but starting at $200,000. And then finally, follow-up reviews. We did not have any current fees for this activity initially. It's not in the current fee schedule, and we are proposing adding fees for the 1, 2, and 5-year follow-up review based on the level of effort needed to conduct that work. Okay, I'm gonna do one more slide and then I'm gonna stop and we'll go to comments. So the next slide looks at a 5-year fee overview. So how much does this add up to? And I think someone referenced this earlier in the meeting. We are assuming that all transactions that go to preliminary review, there's the $30,000 transaction fee, no outside advisor fees, and then the follow-up fees if the transaction closes. So total fees over 5 years would be $90,000. On the comprehensive review side, we think 5 to 10% of transactions would go to comprehensive review, and the fees would be $260,000 to $410,000 over 5 years, plus outside advisor fees. So those are still separate. And then last, let's go to slide 67, please, Melissa. Retention of outside advisors. One more. Yeah, this one. Okay. So wanted to just share how many transactions we've used outside advisors on. So the orange bar here is 14 or is preliminary review. So out of the 60 preliminary reviews-ish that we've worked on to date, we've brought on a outside advisor for legal support in 16 of them. The blue bars are the transactions, the 6 transactions that have gone to comprehensive review, and you can see the different types of outside advisors that we have brought on. So, for example, we brought on legal outside advisors in 6 of the 6 comprehensive reviews. I do want to note, however, that not all of these outside advisor costs were passed on to entities. Some of them were borne by OHA. So this is not a one-to-one. Entities bore all of these costs, and just want to be really upfront about that. So I'm going to stop there. I know we only have about 7 minutes left, and I want to get through as many comments as possible. So let's save 1 minute for wrap up. Melissa, let's bring the slides down and do comments. So in order, I see Tim, Sierra, and Jessica as the first 3.
I will keep mine super quick. These fees are exorbitant. I work on an hourly basis and would blush at putting fees of this size in front of a client in the context of a transaction that is simply going to preliminary review. I encourage OHA to think about when it's creating these fees, work out what is reasonable and that to cost to impose on the parties, and figure out the amount of work that it can do within that reasonable fee, rather than holding as constant the amount of work that it's currently doing and then imposing unaffordable fees. The OHA significantly risks creating a vicious cycle here where these fees prevent many transactions from going through, which would force them to further increase the fees on those that do have to go through, and creating a real vicious cycle. But I'll leave to others to further expand on those points.
Thanks, Tim. Sierra?
Okay, sorry. Lots to click there. I have quite a few comments. First, it appears throughout this presentation that there was not a clear accounting of the actual program costs. We do not know the FTE for the program. And we also do not know now to what extent which outside advisor fees OHA is absorbing and which are being passed on to the entities in a transaction. And so the lack of transparency around this program is alarming. There really doesn't appear to be a basis for this RAC to consider how these fees align with the actual costs of the program at OHA. And throughout all of this and thinking about the exorbitant costs of these fees, it's important to emphasize the actual costs of this program to OHA and to the parties of a transaction. Entities need to retain counsel, pay the fees, review past emergency petitions if they're paying for both parties, counsel and consultants, which magnifies all of these fees, and then addition to the penalties as well. And so we really do need to emphasize that it is important for OHA to share how much is being spent on outside counsel and consultants for each of the transactions that have been reviewed.
Thanks, Sierra. Jessica?
Yeah, thank you. Sarah, we want to emphasize that the costs with the transactions such as these are not limited to the fees that we pay to the agency. There are a lot of costs associated that go into a determination about does it make sense for us to partner and to merge and preserve services? Or is there a point at which entities will just say, you know what is cheaper for me to do? To just close the doors and abandon the community. And that, speaking for Providence, and our history with the sisters, is unimaginable to us as an entity to just walk away. But there can become a financial tipping point where we will have no choice. And these fees represent that kind of risk on top of potential civil penalties, on top of, on top of, on top of. And that I don't think is the interest of the agency. We would ask for any analysis that the agency has done about what would need to happen in order to right size the program to operate within the fees that are being collected today. Or at what point would you not be able to meet a statutory requirement? I appreciate we have built a gold-plated model of trying to do this. Have we looked at how other states are doing very similar programs and trying to right size this so that we're able to accomplish the statutory goals, but not cost so much? And we would say that that's what we need to do as a state, is look at how we can right size this together.
Thanks,
And then,
Jessica. I'm going to stop you there because we're just about out of time.
Sure.
So I want to wrap us up. I want to acknowledge that this was a substantial topic with not a lot of time for discussion. I really encourage RAC members of the public, to continue to submit public comment. I heard earlier that there was a question about whether or not we should have a third RAC meeting. I think that is something OHA will consider, and we will be back in touch with RAC members and let you know. I want to reiterate the deadline of the soft deadline of January 16th for comments on this second red line draft, including the proposed fee schedule. And finally, I want to draw your attention to two other documents that are part of Oregon's administrative rulemaking, which are the Racial Equity Impact Statement and the Statement of Need and Fiscal Impact. Those are both on the website and included in the materials for today's RAC meeting, and we welcome additional comments on those documents as well. And they are being linked in the chat right now. So, reminder of next steps. Rulemaking is still in process. We are still accepting public comment. We will consider whether or not a third RAC meeting is needed to continue this conversation, and we'll update any timelines and next steps in terms of updated rule drafts, submitting to Secretary of State, rules hearing, and final public comments via email and on our website. Just about at time. Are there any process questions that anyone has about where we're going from here? Sierra?
Yes, what is your estimated timeline for posting the recording for this RAC meeting?
We try to have recordings posted within 24 hours.
Thank
So
you.
it's Thursday. We'll aim for sometime tomorrow. Jeff.
When will we find out what your tolling proposal is, or is that going to be in the red line, the next red line?
Almost certainly. All right. I want to respect everyone's time. Thank you for engaging in this process. Really appreciate all of the very thoughtful comments and time you've taken to participate in this discussion. Look forward to receiving additional written comments, and we will talk to you all soon. Thank you.